Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Liz Cheney got the starring role, and I got to tell you, I'm a little, I don't know, concerned about putting Liz Cheney out in the front. Because are we making her the Republicans', 2028 presidential nominee? Are we making her, putting her on another level once the Republican Party finally turns on the former guy? Is she now going to be the front runner? I'm sure that's her plans. But the texts that she was reading, Dumb Jr., his statements, all of the statements from the Fox News people, and look, we always knew that Fox News played a really important role in this administration, but the fact that they're texting in real time to the chief of staff to tell him what to do, wow. And here to share some thoughts on just how wow that really is, I've asked our good friend Kevin Gannon to come talk with us. Kevin's a professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Grandview University. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be with you again.
So, I'm looking at the Liz Cheney's, texts and all the things that came out of this, and this cozy relationship that they can just, they're just texting each other like they're old buddies, hanging out, having beers. Is that too cozy, do you think?
Well, I think it should be something that makes us uncomfortable. And by us, I mean people who favor a functioning democracy, right? Because it's not just media. I think one of the traps we fall into is we say, oh, well, the Trump administration had a cozy relationship with media. Well, Fox News is a different kind. I mean, it's a propaganda arm, right? And it basically acted as the state media for the Trump administration. And so when you look at the way that authoritarian regimes operate from the 19th into the 20th century, that's a distinguishing characteristic, right? The sort of quasi-official agency that sets this narrative and that has enormous pull, like a shadow cabinet behind the scenes. And one thing I thought was really interesting about that I'm not seeing emphasized as much is, it's shocking to see the text. It's shocking to see this unfold in real time. And you're sort of scratching your head saying, how do these people just have all this influence? But look at what they're texting. They're not saying, hey, this is bad for democracy, or, hey, this is an awful thing and Congress people are under threat. They're saying this looks bad. The optics aren't good. This is going to tar your legacy, right? Like, it's all about optics and spin and what's good for Trump. There's no concern, at least in the messages that I've read or that I've heard, there's no concern at all of the fact that, this is an insurrection, right? And that level of disconnect and this, what it says about this sort of very tight bubble that Fox has created, this sort of epistemic bubble, that to me is the real concerning element out of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, all of these talking heads, and look, the right wing has done a masterful job of creating this. They've created this massive, powerful echo chamber from dominating almost all of talk radio to cable news to the online space. They have spent time, resource, and money attracting the best talent to spread the best propaganda. I mean, I watched Sean Hannity interview Mark Meadows, and it was really the most shameless defense of the texts that were being sent out, and really the most dismissive, so that the audience is, this isn't a big deal. This is just Democrats playing a game. No, this was a Republican Party trying to overthrow the will of we the people. That is a pretty big, to use a Joe Biden line, it's a BFD, man.
Yeah, it is. And, there are parallels with this in U.S. history, right? That, people talk about the failure of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And yes, Reconstruction was resisted by revanchist white Southerners, by terrorist groups like the Klan, by, Democrat politicians in the South back when the Democratic Party was the party of the Confederacy, right? But that's not all that overthrew Reconstruction. Reconstruction ultimately failed because that stuff outweighed the commitment and the political will to keep Reconstruction going, to sustain it. And so that's, you see this here. Democracy doesn't die in like one big fell swoop.
Right.
Democracy dies piece by piece when people sort of just say, that's how it, fatalism, cynicism, detachment, whatever. But, what we're seeing now is there should be a 5-alarm fire in Congress from the Democratic side, at least. And you're seeing emphasis on formalism and procedure and norms as if, the last 4 years haven't proven the bankruptcy of those.
Yeah.
That's how democracy dies. Piece by piece, and apathy and sort of a ho-hum business as usual. Scholars of fascism will tell you, like, you don't wake up one day in a fascist state, right? And there's no big announcement that says, hello, we're authoritarians now.
Right.
You're still going to watch TV. You're still going to go to work. You're still going to get pizza delivered. Everyday life will go on. But the context in which it unfolds, look at where we are now compared to where we were in 2015. And it's an eon's worth, figuratively speaking, but not by much, right, of change that's occurred. Look where we are now versus where we were in 2015 in terms of the health of our democracy. And then ask yourself, if that doesn't alarm you, I'm not quite sure what would.
No. I mean, the criming that they used to do back then, they at least tried to cover up and justify.
Right.
Today, it's right out in front of us. They literally wrote their treason down in memos. We have
they made a
writing.
PowerPoint.
In PowerPoint on memos, we have in writing. They videotaped their treason. And they're trying to tell us that, no, that wasn't what that was. That was really something else. And the reality is, it was what it was. They wanted to overthrow the will of the people. It was that simple.
Right. And they're counting on the fact that there's so many folks who be like, it can never happen here. Like, just the horror that someone in the U.S. would confront the idea of a coup. That's what happens in third world countries, right? That's what we outsource. We don't do that at home.
Right.
But that's what it is. By any objective standard, that's exactly what occurred. And there's this weird sort of out-of-body experience now for those of us who are trying to call it what it is, and seeing this sort of either indifference or lack of urgency on the part of folks who were elected to boldly lead and not be the previous administration. It's an absolute bizarro world right now, and it's really discouraging.
No, I say this is something that started years and years ago. This was the kickoff of the Heritage Foundation back in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. All of the infrastructure that they built around Lewis Powell's memo, the treatise on how to save free enterprise, the investment that corporate America made in breaking unions and destroying regulations. And this has all been about corporatocracy. This has all been about the moneyed interest getting more. And how they do that is they got to tear us apart. And the Reagan Revolution was all about ripping the Democratic Party's base, the working class, to shreds. And he did just that.
Yeah, anti-unionism was the leading edge of this, right? I mean, you'll remember when Paul Weyrich, addressed where he said, I don't want too many people to vote. Frankly, I want fewer people to vote. This has been out in the open for anyone who's bothered to be listening for decades. And, part of you say it, you ask yourself, am I the only one who sees this, right? And that's how effective this has all been. Those of us who've observed this, who see this and are trying to explain what's going on, we're the ones who sound like the tinfoil hat wearers, right? Yep. It's this crazy upside down world. And it's frightening, because when things become unmoored like that, you're at a real problematic state in terms of keeping your functioning democracy democratic.
No, I mean, the joke back in the '92 election, I think it was Molly Ivins, the writer from Texas, who when observing Pat Buchanan's presidential speeches, said those were much better in their original German, because he was the extreme back then. Today, I think he'd be moderate, considered a moderate. He wouldn't be a Republican today, which is a weird kind of place to be.
Well, look at who is being lifted up as the statesman in the Republican Party. The good Republicans. I mean, it's Kinzinger, who voted with Trump over 90% of the time and favors voter disfranchisement. Liz Cheney, like you were saying, has become the hero, sort of like Mitt Romney was the good Republican back in the second impeachment hearing. And there's this desperate craving on the part of most of your legacy media to cling to this fiction that we have a viable two-party system that functions like it always has. And we don't. We have one coalition, the Democratic Party, and we have an authoritarian group. That's not a party system.
No,
that's a hostage situation.
It's scary stuff. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Kevin Gannon. Kevin's a professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning there at Grandview University. I'm looking at this moment, and there are a lot of parallels back to the fascist era of the past. And I hate to bring up the Nazi stuff. I've had people say, this is the Reichstag thing, and I'm going, no, I think this is earlier. I think we've got some real problems in the building of this because people want trains to run on time. We want safety and security, which is the message we keep hearing from the folks on the right, which is, you want to be safe, don't you? Well, those Democrats can't do it. You want to make a lot of money, don't you? Well, they're going to tax you. It's all about that kind of division and fear more than anything. And sadly, it works.
Yeah. If you're conditioned to see anybody different from you or anything that makes you uncomfortable as an existential threat, as a mortal threat, you're never going to put your weapons down. And that's what we've got, right? We've got weaponized political culture now where so many folks, in particular white folks, are afraid to put down the weapons. And that's why this right-wing appeal is so successful. You don't even, if you want to stay at home in the U.S. for the parallels, look at, the years after Reconstruction when the Supreme Court redefined Reconstruction amendments to be more corporate friendly than civil rights friendly, when Jim Crow rises throughout the South, when the Klan is resurgent and marching down the streets of Washington, D.C. in the early 20th century. Things were okay economically. The U.S. was expanding overseas. All of these things were occurring, but yet at the same time, you had basically racist authoritarianism, and the mainstream was okay with that.
Yeah.
And so we see that happen today too. That's a really, really dangerous thing. And the parallels are ominous. You don't even have to go to the Germans, because the Germans copied a lot of what they did from the laws that the U.S. passed in the aftermath of Reconstruction.
Not surprising.
Always been enemies.
Yeah, but I guess I look at this and I'm like, am I surprised that we would accept that we would accept the corporatocracy? Because we already believe, we've been sold the idea that there's the benevolent corporation, that if we give them enough power and enough wealth, that things are going to trickle down like, rivers of gold and honey, and we'll be just fine. And yet every day we see that not being true. And I point to what's going on, in Kentucky and in Illinois, where you had this candle factory who's threatening to fire people if they go home to their families. Same thing, supposedly at the Amazon plant there in Illinois. And I'm going, this is corporate power run amok. Right. So for me, the answer in all of this is we got to figure out how to put down our divides and figure out how we take on corporate America. It's not even the Republicans I'm afraid of. It's the corporate Supreme Court. It's the corporate court system. It's the corporate party and the Democratic side, for that matter. It's the moneyed interest. This isn't right or left. This is top down.
And what it's done is, the reason we don't see as much resistance or overt opposition is so many people just feel detached and disfranchised. Like, why even bother at this point? It's defeatism. And that's, of course, corporate strategy being successful, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not that you don't see any resistance. It's the lack of will to even resist.
And it goes back to what you said about Paul Weyrich. In 1980, that comment was made to 20,000 Baptist ministers in Texas. Where he's saying, look, we don't want everybody to vote. We just want our people to vote. Right. Our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down, was his exact words, because they understood that politically they had to take over the court system. And give them credit. You read that 1971 Powell memo. You listen to the things that the Heritage Foundation has put out. Their playbook, they have executed to the T, because ultimately the moneyed interests want it.
Right. Because order is good for business. Liberty's messy. Freedom and individuality's messy. Order, you can set your watch by it.
The trains are going to run on time, won't they? So you're, as a historian, as someone who has studied the past, and we're told that if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat the future. How doomed are we?
I try to remain optimistic in this, but it's really tough in this climate. Gramsci wrote, optimism, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, the signs are so bad. This is the frog in boiling water moment. Water's been boiling for a while, right? It's what I worry about is that with this massive disenfranchisement and the way that people feel detached from governance, what you're going to have when the breaking strain finally approaches is violence and upheaval. rather than change through the formal political process.
Yeah.
And when you have violence and upheaval, that's leveraged by the right to say, see, we told you these people were unsafe. See, we told you that we should be the ones in charge. And that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that, because we could see this with January 6th, right? There seems to be this sense that, the folks thought that Antifa was going to show up on January 6th, and that would be the pretext for Trump to declare an emergency and for them to suspend the ratification of the electoral votes. And the fact that Antifa didn't show up, of course, it changes that whole plan. I think there's hints that that's what the right is looking for. They're spoiling for a fight to leverage that. And so I think we're at a very delicate moment where the conditions are very right for that sort of thing. But there's also a really organized bloc on the right that's ready to leverage that.
Oh, no. And look, I completely agree with you. I think we've got a country, a large portion in this country who want to be Kyle Rittenhouse. They want to find that trouble so that they can put it down. Because to me, the whole thing about the Rittenhouse thing is he went looking for trouble. He found trouble.
Right.
And we said it's okay to do that, which is frightening.
Well, and that's, look at the way that the right, and in particular white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups, have infiltrated law enforcement. The only difference between them and Kyle Rittenhouse is they had a badge and a license.
Yeah, excellent point.
And they're spoiling for a fight too. I think this is a real pervasive thing that, it's the metaphor that historians use is the powder keg, right? We're sitting on top of it and the one spark sets it off. And I hope it doesn't blow like, the image would suggest that it does. But we are in a really dangerous moment, and it behooves all of us as citizens who care about the functioning of the society in any sort of just and equitable way to be invested in holding our elected officials accountable, in participating in the process, not just in formal voting, but supporting unions, supporting people on the front lines, supporting the groups that are leveraging change, because that's the counterweight right now. And they need all the help that they can get.
Yeah, and we need a voting rights bill. So last minute I got, I'm looking at, what needs to be done, and nothing more important in my view than to secure the right to vote, because, I'm of the mindset this could be our last fair, free, open election if things don't go somewhat right in the Senate.
Yeah, with no voting rights bill right now, we will not have free, open elections in the future.
And you don't see that as hyperbole?
No, I don't. I think we are at that point. Without national protection for voting rights legislation, that, the Supreme Court is obviously not the branch of the national government that's going to do it. It's up to Congress. This is the big screaming, alarm right now. Without that, nothing else gets fixed. Everything else gets worse. It really is, when we get down to it, that simple.
Scary, scary stuff. Kevin, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing some of your expertise. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rick. Pleasure to be with you.
As always, great stuff. Our good friend Kevin Gannon, professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching there at Grandview University. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.